everybody. You are listening to I'm Over It. My name is Atlanta DeCadenet Taylor, and this is my podcast.
Hi, everybody. I am here with Scarlett Curtis. No. Who is a writer, activist, journalist. You actually have written 2 books.
Well, sort of half written. I've curated 2 books,
Okay.
which is a different thing than writing them.
Okay, fine. You have created 2 books. You have started a activist, like the Pink protest.
Yes, we're an activist collective.
Collective.
Yeah, it's basically just a word for like lots of motivated young women who want to change things.
Yes. And you recently received a massive award, right, from Time for Change?
Yeah, I got the Changemaker Award from Time for Change, which was one of the most surreal moments of my life. And I still forget that it actually happened. You know, when you have imposter syndrome so much that you just sort of go into a daze. That was what that was like.
No, your speech was amazing. I listened to it and I loved it. And I related so much. Imposter syndrome is like my life.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. I mean, I wonder if we were just talking about how, you know, neither of us finished high school. And, you know, I just had been posting about my GED and taking my GED, and Scarlett went to NYU. And I was asking, well, how the hell did you get into NYU if you dropped out of school at 14? Like, you know, what's in your water? And
did you pay them?
No, that wasn't there. I wasn't gonna go there. But just the difference in getting to choose your education, and you know, all of a sudden you're getting given these awards and you're like, what the hell? I didn't even finish high school. Like, that's gonna have to do a number on one's brain.
Totally. And I think we probably have this in common, but I spent so long being like the worrying child within my family and within my parents' like community. You know, I was the one that dropped out of school at 16. I was the one that kept having different breakdowns. I was the one that went to rehab for a year. Like I defined myself as the person that like things went wrong for. And then when things start going right, even if you've fought really, really hard to get to that place, you just can't. I think it's really hard to get out of that headspace of thinking that you're like the fuck up, basically.
Oh, yeah. And then everyone else in your life still thinks you're the fuck up, even when you're not. Like, I'm automatically always like the problem. Even though I'm like, I've been well for years. Like, I'm not fucking up, but just because I was chronically the fuck up my whole, you know, adolescent life, I'm just permanently the fuck up. And
I still think of myself as the fuck up. And then sometimes I look at like my friends or my siblings and I'm like, I have my life together so much more than any of you, but I'm still thinking of myself as like a complete failure, whereas 100%. You all think you're great.
No, I know. Do you find that, because I still have some like chip on my shoulder about the education piece, where I still think like I have this thing in my head that's like, you're only successful if you have gone around this like traditional educational journey or path. Like, even though you might have created all of these things and developed this personality or whatever it is, for some reason I still am just like, well, I didn't go to college, I didn't get degrees, I didn't do this, I didn't do well in high school, therefore it's like whatever I've done is like nothing in comparison to that. I don't know what that is.
And I think our society really, like Western society, really makes you feel like unless you have the traditional school background, you can't succeed. And I think I actually went through all of this when I was like 18 or 19, because I had at that point been out of school for 5 years. I had no A-levels, I had 2 GCSEs. Before that, I was at a really high pressured all-girls school. And I just didn't think I was ever going to have any kind of a life unless I went to university, because that was what I'd been told, you know, was the way. And I would never have been able to get into any UK universities because I didn't have A-levels. So I became obsessed with American universities, and I took my SATs and I took my GED. And I'd been blogging and doing journalism the whole time that I was ill. So I just started applying to places with like all my, you know, things that I'd done. But now looking back, now that I've like, I mean, in the end, it took me almost 6 years to finish NYU because my mental health kept getting bad and my other work stuff kept getting in the way.
Yeah.
And actually, it's something I'm really glad I did. And it really helped me, like, personally, you know, I just like learning things. But it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things in the way that I was told that it mattered when I was 19.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that getting my GED is going to change my career path that I'm on right now. Like, I don't think that it's going to make a huge difference for that. I think it's just for myself. And it's just having this sort of like option of if I decided to want to go to college, you know, it always felt like it's just this thing in the way, you know, just mentally.
You've achieved more than most, like almost 99% of college graduates. But we just get this thing ingrained in us if we've done badly at school where you never feel good enough and you never feel like you've actually earned the things you've achieved because you fucked up high school. And, you know, the world tells you at that point that your whole life is going to be a failure.
Yeah, definitely. So, because I was going to say, okay, so you get in to college, right?
Yes.
How do you make it through? Because getting in must be one step, but then managing, you know, moving to New York. I mean, it sounds like.
I mean, looking back, it's like I don't know how I made it through. You know, I moved to New York when I was 19. Before that point, I hadn't left the house in 5 years, except to go to doctor's appointments or go to rehab or, you know, anything. And I remember the week before I moved to New York, I had a drink in a bar with a friend and I called my mum, was like, oh my God, I just went to a bar. Can you believe it? And then I moved to New York. And it was, I think, it was probably a mistake. New York is a very hard place to live. And it was that year, my first year in New York was the hardest year of my whole life. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But in the end, it was kind of the thing that made me like pull myself out of that dark place, I think, because I had to, you know, whereas when I was living with my parents and living in sort of the comfort that I'd grown up in, I didn't necessarily have to.
No, I get it. It's just this safety blanket. It's just this net there. Like if shit hits the fan, you can just go home and have your back rubbed or whatever. And like, you know, in New York, you really have to sort your shit out. There's just, you got to do it, you know, which I think is one of the greatest things about New York. If you're young and you need to grow up, like I really think that I learned how to be more of a person in New York because I was about 18 when I moved to New York. And I had to figure my shit out, but it's hard. And especially when you have, you know, mental health issues. That must have been a huge culture shock then. So how were you, like, so you stopped school at 14 and you were sick. What were you sick with? What was it?
I basically had a operation on my spine when I was 14 and something went wrong in the operation. So I then couldn't walk for about almost 3 years. And then finally, and during that time, I just went through like medical hell. I was in constant pain. I was in a wheelchair most of the time. And then after 3 years, I had another operation, physically recovered, and then had a complete breakdown and would have a panic attack every time I stepped outside my room, you know, was very sort of suicidal and all of that. And then I think I saw moving to New York as almost like the last chance for me to get better. You know, I was like,
Hail Mary.
I'm going to just become like the lady in my parents' attic. And I need to take this, you know, just take a chance and see what happens. But it was the biggest culture shock in every way. And it was not your typical college experience. I really enjoyed my lessons, but I would basically just sort of be in my room in bed crying and then go to a lesson and then come home and then do that again for a year.
Do you think that your mental, like when was the first time you really remember being depressed?
I think looking back now, I was always quite an anxious child. I think everyone that has later on gets diagnosed with anything can see traces of it, you know, in their childhood. But I think it really kicked in when I physically got better and sort of stopped having to be so strong physically. You know, the whole time that I was in pain, I sort of had to go get through it mentally. And when you're a sick child, there's a lot of weird things people say to you, like you're gonna heal quicker if you're strong and resilient, you know, and actually you're not. You don't have to be strong. But there's a lot of pressure put on, there was a lot of pressure put on me. And I think when I was like 17 and I came out of that, my whole mental health just crashed, and I was sort of an unrecognizable person. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't stop crying. It just hit me all at once. What about you? What happened for you?
I think the first time because I actually was thinking about this recently.
I'm gonna try and move this back. Sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm like, my hair is crazy looking, but it's okay. Honestly, I think I was like 12. I was the same deal. I'm pretty sure I was like an anxious kid. There was a lot of like, you know, I came from a divorced family. There was a lot of stuff that was really hard dealing with that. And then, yeah, I ended up moving actually to New York in my 7th grade year.
Wow.
And I had been, you know, living, I mean, I also like kind of went all over the place with my mom, but it was, you know, I worked really hard to get into this school in LA because I came from my like elementary school was very like talking sticks and you
Yes.
know calling like 12 kids in a class, calling the teacher by their first name kind of thing. And so like I worked my ass off to get into this like fancy private school, and you know, was the only kid in my class that managed to get into school like that. And basically like out of nowhere, it was like, we're moving to New York in
Wow.
January. And it was freezing cold. We moved to like Brooklyn. We were living like right by the Atlantic Center, which is like in
Yes.
Flatbush
Yeah.
area. I was like totally freaked out. So that's when I really remember like the first time just feeling that like deep just loneliness. And obviously I think a lot of it is outside stuff, right? Like I'm lonely because I don't have any friends. It was like AIM is just starting, but like you
Yeah.
can FaceTime with your friends, you know. And that's when I like, you know, started smoking weed a lot and drinking, and that's when that started. And then that's like a whole other fucking
I think that's one of the hardest things with mental illness in kids is like often, you know, if your child's depressed, you just think they're lazy. Or
oh
if
yeah
they're lonely, you just think they haven't got enough friends and they need to make a bit more effort. And we're very bad, especially with children, at recognizing these symptoms because so often, I mean, the amount of times I was told that my depression was because of my hormones and because I just got my period or because of, you know, whatever. And you know, hormones are often tied to those things, but it's not an excuse for a child who's depressed or anxious. And yeah, I think parents as well, I've learned over the years how painful it is for a parent to acknowledge that their child, it has these kind of issues because they see it as a sort of statement on them in a way that you never would if your child had a broken leg or if your child had a flu. You'd never be like, this is my fault. But if your child has a mental illness, parents get very defensive and scared of it, I think.
Yeah, I also, as you're talking about like being called lazy and stuff, I have such like PTSD from that because I remember when I eventually moved back to LA for high school, again, I was like, had just made friends, you know, I had found a boyfriend at the time, and then it was like, just kidding, we're moving back to LA. We never got to go, it was like we came out for a vacation, and then it was like, you're not going back. I
Oh
never
my
got to go
God.
and pack up my stuff. I never got to go say bye to anyone. I had to go back to this school where, you know, it was like it was again like a culture shock because I'd finally settled into like being in New York and whatever. And I was so depressed. And I remember like my family, everyone would be like, you're lazy. Like, you're just lazy. That's why you can't get up. That's why you want to sleep all day, because you're lazy. And I was like, I couldn't focus. I couldn't do my schoolwork. I just felt like I really wanted to die most of the time. And so, yeah, being told I was lazy, I still to this day, I'm so sensitive to that, because it was this struggle of like, but I'm really trying, but I can't get out of bed.
And what's so hard about mental illness in general is that it manifests like other kind of human traits. So you might be suffering from severe depression, but your symptoms might be that you're angry or tired all the time or grumpy all the time. And it's very hard for people to see the difference between the two. And I'm exactly the same. There's sort of still like words and traits that I get so triggered by, because I spent so long thinking that I was lazy and that I just had like an anger problem, or that, you know, I was just a horrible person. And actually,
or that you're the fuck up, right? Like,
exactly,
that's the same, the combination of like you're lazy and also you're the problem child, where like if you would just get your shit together, everything would be fine.
But also
that combo.
A child who gets ill with a physical illness is never called the fuck up, you know? But when it's mental illness, you're sort of, our society just slips into this language of like, it's your fault. You're just, you know, got lots of issues and you need to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and deal with it.
You know, it's hard because I'm sure you have this too, like friends who deal with younger kids who have mental illness. As you're saying, like, it's really hard because when you're having an outbreak of some kind, or you're having, again, it manifests in ways that really affect those around you. And it's hard to not be, it's hard to not have a response to that. Like, of course if someone's mean to you because they're struggling, you're going to have an emotional response to that. Right. And so it's so hard.
This is actually something I'm really passionate about talking about, because I think we have this view of someone who's got anxiety or depression as like very sweet and quiet and like sitting in their bed crying and explaining what's wrong with them. But in reality, most people who are really suffering become volatile and angry and antisocial and rude. I mean, that was what happens to me. You know, I didn't become sweet and like worthy of sympathy. I just became what my family thought was a horrible person. And it's very hard for people that love you, I think, to see through that, because you're hurting them and you're a nightmare to be around. And how do you help that person get help,
How? It's always, it's hard because it's like, for me, I feel like even though there was intervention when I was younger, like I also went to a rehab at 15 and there was intervention, but I had to come to that conclusion. I mean, for me, it was very also intertwined with like drug addiction and all of that stuff. Yeah. So it was really hard to know what was going on. And it took me till I was 24 to properly figure out what was going on, as soon as like I removed all of that stuff. But when I think about younger kids, it's so hard, because if they're like, I'm fine. You can't drag them to the doctor and make them you can try.
Yeah. But I think, as we probably both know, unless you're open to it, that treatment doesn't really work.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it makes me really sad. Like, do you have younger siblings or anything?
Yeah. So I've got 4 younger brothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like so hyper protective of my siblings.
Me too.
Right? Because I'm just like, please don't end up like me. Please,
oh my God. I'm the same. And I assume things on them that are so not true. Like, one of my brothers will look a bit sad one day and I'll bring him into my bedroom and be like, look, if you're anxious, just tell me, like, tell me what you're going through. And he's like, I'm just tired, like, piss off. And I'm like, okay, but seriously, if you're actually depressed and that's your language for depression, like, please just tell me. And they all just get so annoyed by it. But I'm exactly the same. I'm like, I can't bear the idea of them going through what I went through. But I think both of us sort of have to look at it and go, we came out the other side fine, yeah, we went through shit and it was horrible, but in the end we got through it. And I think I definitely over panic when I see young people going through hard times, because it just hits such a nerve in me of how much pain I was in at that age.
No, definitely. So then at what point, so NYU is a shit show for you, basically. Living in New York
Yeah.
was really hard.
It was really hard, and actually everything, I had a really terrible year, and then everything sort of, I didn't make any friends my own age. By that point, I basically didn't know how to talk to people my own age.
I feel that too.
My best friend when I left for NYU, and my only friend, was a 52-year-old man, and I was like, had no idea how to talk to teenagers. So I was like, you're really weird and annoying, and you will think I'm a freak. And I eventually started interning at a charity, and that was sort of a real turning point for me, because it was suddenly something I cared about, and I got very involved with a lot of different activist communities in New York. And I think, and they were all, you know, older women and men and people I actually related to. And for me, that was really when everything sort of turned around. And so in the end, I got through New York, and it was a good experience, but it was definitely hard. And when I see people talking about moving to New York, I'm sort of always like, be careful. It's really, really hard.
Now I'm remembering, I'm pretty sure in your Time for Change speech, you said something about how feminism kind of saved your life, how helping other people saved your life because it mattered to you to be able to help others. You cared more about others than yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think it's not a very like rare thing, you know. I think whenever we do things for other people, it makes you feel great about yourself. And I sometimes think we need to sort of change the way that we talk about activism or charity, because it can be the most sort of fulfilling and incredible thing to do in the world. And I always say that I'm like the most selfish activist in the world, because I do all of this stuff because it makes me feel connected to other people, and it makes me feel like I've got a purpose. And I spent so long feeling so isolated and purposeless and like such a burden on everyone around me, and having a job where I get to slightly reverse that is the best feeling in the world.
I really relate to that too. I feel that there have been so many days, like even I remember when I was like really going through it, must have been 26 or something, 25, and the only thing that kept me going, like I had, you know, I'm trying to like not get too crazy, but I had been assaulted, and I ended up having to like, you know, I decided to go through reporting it and dealing with police, and it was like a whole thing, you know, but the only thing that kept me going was just knowing that I could help someone else who was going through that. You know, there were so many times where I felt like I couldn't help myself, but I cared more about others and wanting to be helpful for them. And it did help me shift my perspective a lot, and being like, wow, because it's funny, like the saying, you're the most selfish activist ever. Because of course it's like, you know, there's both sides, right? Because like you're being helpful, but then you're also feeling better. And so it's just this whole, I agree with you that the perspective should be shifted, because I was actually talking to a bunch of friends about this last night, that if you aim for happiness, it's like you think about self, what can I do to better myself, right? Like, but really happiness is a byproduct of being helpful to others. And that's what I've found, like no matter how well I eat, no matter what my exercise routine is, whatever it is, that doesn't equal happiness. The only thing I've found to equal happiness is being helpful to others.
Yeah, and I'm feeling you have some kind of purpose, you know. I think I know I've had depression for such a huge portion of my life now, and my happiness is so unreliable. Like I could be on a desert island with the people I loved most in the world, you know, lying on the beach,
miserable,
and I could be miserable. I have no idea when I'm going to be happy and when I'm going to be in floods of tears. And so I think from quite a young age, I sort of gave up on happiness a bit and was like, look, I'm never going to be able to control that. I don't know when it's going to come and when it's not. I'm going to try and look for other things in my life. I'm going to try and look for purpose and, you know, connection and all those things. And actually that's ended up being a lot more, giving me a lot more happiness than I ever thought I'd have. But I just want to, like, what you just shared, I think is so important, because I, again, without getting into too much detail, I had a similar situation when I was a teenager. And I was advised by lawyers and by people not to press charges and not to go through any kind of a process, because they just said it would be too traumatic. And I think it's a situation that so many young people and young girls face, and it's like a lose-lose, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was
It's a terrible choice to make a person go through.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't convict someone for murder or for robbing a bank, you know.
Yeah.
I don't really understand why we're forced to choose that.
Yeah, well, what I found always like really interesting is I was like, this is the only kind of like crime that people recommend you don't do anything about, right?
Yeah.
Like anything to do with like domestic abuse or assault or something, it's like, don't bother. It's going to be so much more hurtful. And I'm the same way. I'm like, if somebody robbed me, I'll do
Yeah.
you know, but
If someone stole your car, no one would be like, it's going to be really painful to try and convict that person who stole your car.
Yeah. But it was definitely I'm really grateful that I did it, because for me, I felt like I just had to, you know, it was just, I don't, you know, it's everyone said the same thing to me. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. You know, and, you know, the person was a well-known person and it was like a whole thing and they had a lot of money behind them, etc., you know. But for me, I felt like I just had to see it through. I had to do everything that I had to do. But it's like you finally start doing well and then you get a call from the police officers, you know, and it'd be like, it really went on for like over 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so incredible that you talk about it, because more people need more examples. Like when I was going through this, I had no idea. I didn't know anyone that had to make that choice or that had been in that situation. And I just trusted what people were saying to me. And I think it's your personal decision, but I had to do a lot more therapy and sort of anger management and all that as a result of not doing that, because I never had that moment that actually every human should have a right to have.
Yeah. I mean, nothing happened, you know.
Yeah, well, that's also the problem. The system is fucked and nothing ever happens. But I think sometimes even just saying it out loud can be very therapeutic in a way.
Yeah. I mean, my reason for doing it is I was like, if he ever goes near another woman and they say something, this is on his record. So it can't be like, oh, weird, he's never done anything before. That will always be there. And that was the reason. And I was like, if anyone ever says anything, they'll see that. And that was really what it was about, was just like it being there. You know, I knew it was very unlikely anything would happen. But you know, what you're saying is like, I had one person that I spoke to who said, fuck it, you have to report that. You have to do it. She was pretty intense, you know, activist as well. And I'm really grateful that I spoke to her. And she really gave me the strength to do that. And I've since had one friend who also ended up reporting it and like spoke to me about it. And it was this beautiful thing of like, you know, the cycle of like one person giving me the power and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole other.
And in a way, weirdly, I think about these things sometimes, like I think about mental health, where I do a lot of work with young people in mental health, and a lot of parents say like, well, how do I know that my child is telling the truth when they say that they have anxiety or they say they have depression? What if they just don't want to go to school? And when it comes to like opening up about your mental health or reporting any kind of assault or any of these things, I think if people knew how horrific it is to share that with anyone, no one would ever not believe another woman or another person who opens up about anything, because it's so much easier not to say anything. It's so in both these cases, you know, it's so much easier to just keep it to yourself and get on with your life. And it kills me when I see people doubting any woman or any, you know, victim of anything, because it's a lot easier not to say it, not to speak up.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I mean, at a point you hit where you kind of just like accept it. You have to just like let it go, you know. Do you ever have this where I always talk about it, like there are some things you're like, I want to do this, and the road just opens for you and it's just right, you know. And then there are other things that you're like, I want to do this, and it's just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And it's like, how hard do I want to push? How much do I want to try and make this happen, you know? And that's what kind of ended up happening at a point with that, where I got to I hit a wall and I was like, okay, either like I've exhausted all options here. I've spoken to lawyers. I have spoken to the DA. You know, I had to go and like give evidence. It was like a whole thing. And then it just, you know, I was like, okay, nothing's going to happen, you know, and and thank God, I think that after I accepted that, really the healing began, because I was holding on to this anger as well that has still to this day been very hard. I'm a lot better now, but I remember I'd see like any like frat looking white dude like, fuck you fucking asshole. You know, I'd be like, get out the way, like so displaced anger, like
and then you get things where people are like, all feminists are just angry, and you're like, yeah, I am angry at all men, but that's not true.
I know, definitely. It's
I actually think I'm impressed you dug into your anger that young, because I still struggle with anger. Like, I think a lot of doctors say that anxiety is anger turned inwards, and I was sort of abused and mistreated for a lot of years and came out of it only angry at myself. Like, I just thought that I was the worst person. I thought I was, you know, done something wrong, and I was so anxious all the time. And it wasn't until I actually started tapping into some of that anger, which happened through a lot of the feminist work that I did. I think when I started meeting other women who'd been through similar experiences, I was able to be angry on behalf of them and then angry for myself as well. But I think anger can sometimes be really healthy compared to the alternative.
Definitely. And then, but then there's also the fine line, right? Where it can go, and, you know, I felt like, I'm not sure if you've had this in your periods of the work that you do, but sometimes it's just like this snowball effect. Like at the end of the year, last year, I realized that I was so angry about so many things going on in the world that I just felt like I couldn't catch a break, because I was so pissed off. It was like this thing, then this thing, then this thing. You start Trump doing this. And then by the end of the year, I was just like, oh my God, I can't do anything. I feel like I've been hit by a truck, you know.
And also you feel so helpless, because
there's nothing you can do.
There's nothing you can do. And I think a lot of what I've tried to do over the last few years is like really focus on what I can do. And it's not going to be everything I want to do. It's not going to be, you know, changing all the laws I want to change or helping all the people I want to help, but I'd rather be doing something small than sort of just sitting there paralyzed by all the things wrong with the world.
But you have had laws changed, right? You did get a law changed.
But I mean, we can't like reshift, you know, the way the world works. But
no, but that's amazing.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just me at all. I was part of a campaign to try and end period poverty in the UK, which we called the Free Periods Movement. And it basically, this study came out that 1 in 10 girls in the UK can't afford menstrual products, and we were trying to get the government to give free menstrual products to girls in schools, and that ended up happening, which was an amazing feeling. And the whole campaign was basically run by teenage girls, and it was an amazing thing to see that work, you know. And I think we need things like that. I think we need small as activists and as people that care, you need small achievements to keep you going, you know. And I got to see all those teenage girls be a part of a campaign and then it work. And I think that's a really like motivating thing to experience.
Definitely. Okay, so you've got the 2 books that you curated, right? So
Yeah.
Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies.
Yes.
And It's Not Okay to Feel Blue and Other Lies.
Very good. They're actually very complicated titles, and I've started just leaving off the and other lies, and then they don't make any sense. People are like, why did you make a feminist book called Feminists Don't Wear Pink?
So I bought the It's Not Okay to Feel Blue book a while ago, and I was so impressed that you were able to put all of that together. And I mean, when did you put Feminists Don't Wear Pink out first, right?
Yes. So after I'd been doing a lot of the feminist activism, like the period protests, and people started coming to me and saying, would you like to do a book about feminism? And I immediately was like, no. I am a 20-year-old privileged white girl, and that is not a book that anyone needs to read, or, you know, like, I don't know everything, but I would love to help compile an anthology with all these different women's voices, because I also think it's very hard for one woman to write a book about feminism. You know, it's a big topic, and feminism is different for every single person. And the only way that I could sort of see doing a book that was that directly about feminism was by making it a shared project. So yeah, we did that, and then after that, well, it was interesting because I went on a tour for Feminists Don't Wear Pink, and we were doing loads of events and live podcasts and things like that. And every time we do a Q&A at the end, all these girls would be asking questions about feminism, but they were really questions about mental health. You know, they were questions about how the patriarchy and these sort of systems were affecting these people emotionally. And if boys came, they would ask questions about, you know, the male side of feminism, which is that men are told not to open up, and they're told to hide their feelings, and they're told that the only way they can be, you know, a successful person is to make money and be strong. And so it really felt like a natural next step. And I think the topics are actually way more linked than we ever give them credit for, because the patriarchy is so at the root of so many issues in our world.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree a lot. I always get weird about, I'm actually learning to get a little better at me talking about my own experiences, because I have that same thing where I'm like, well, I'm a white privileged girl, like, really, what are you supposed to say?
Yeah.
But I'm learning that it's also okay for me to like share mics. You know, even with the podcast, it's my version of what you did, right? Like, it was always been super important for me to have all kinds of voices from all walks of life, because I only really know, I'm only seeing it from my perspective, right? And like, yeah, I've lived a lot and done a lot of crazy shit, but like, at the end of the day, I've had a very sheltered view of things. And it was always super important to me to be able to share other people's views, because otherwise it's not a full picture.
But I think, I mean, it was really interesting putting together the Blue Book, because I had lived with a lot of guilt for a long time of like, I, you know, have all the resources and, you know, things that people want in the world, and how am I still depressed, and how am I still unhappy, and, you know, I must be the most sort of selfish person in the world to be this unhappy. And mental illness doesn't affect people equally. You know, it is harder if you live in a community where you're not allowed to open up. It's harder if you don't have access to resources and help, but it does affect everyone. And I think the most amazing thing about putting this book together was you had people like Sam Smith, and then, you know, activists or teenagers, and they were going through exactly the same experiences, and everything that Sam Smith has doesn't protect him from suffering with mental illness, just like it wouldn't protect him from getting a stomach bug, or, you know, breaking his leg, or any of these things. And I think we get such shame about talking about mental illness if you are perceived to be someone who's very lucky or has a lot of things. And it's really important that people know that anyone can go through this and it can affect everyone.
Definitely. I mean, definitely. And so you also donated all of the profits from the book, right? The books.
Yeah, so the profits from Feminists in My Pink went to an amazing organization called Girl Up, and then the profits from the Blue Book went to Shout, which is the UK version of Crisis Text Line. So it's a 24/7 anonymous free text line.
How did you educate yourself about all of this stuff?
So I
It's not like you
did.
studied feminism in school, right?
Well, I
did.
kind of ended up doing my degree in like feminist social, well, like the history of social movement. So it was a lot of feminism. So that was really where I learned a lot of that. But I learned most of it just from women that I met in New York and these groups that I joined. And I did a lot of activism around the 2016 election and, you know, things like that. And also you just learn things by, you know, the whole idea of feminism was like, you don't need to study feminism to be a feminist. You know, you can just believe that men and women should be equal and say you're a feminist. And then with the mental health stuff, I do feel very qualified in that purely just from having been mentally ill for a decade. But I also did a lot of training with the text line in how to, you know, talk to people in a crisis and what to say and what not to say.
I should probably do that part of it. I mean, I still have the imposter, but I have the imposter syndrome on that part where I'm like, well, I'm not a therapist, so I can't tell you what to do.
Yes, which I think is not helpful. You know, when I started talking about my mental health when I was like 19, and I did it because at that time, the only things I could find about mental health online were written by therapists, and those can be very useful. But what I actually wanted, and what I think most people suffering want, is just normal people's experiences with these things, you know, not medical language, not psychology. Like I still to this day find the most helpful thing in the world just hearing, you know, someone talk, and even just hearing you talk on this chat has been like, it helps you feel less alone, you know?
Yeah. So what is your, you know, routine like now? You know, now that, I mean, I know it takes a freaking village. I mean,
Yeah.
it is, I was also talking about this, that it's practically a full-time job trying to manage all of the things. It's like, okay,
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
depression, the anxiety, like I'm also bipolar, then like dealing with my recovery from addiction, and then, you know, I mean, it's, and then the emotional
full-time
stuff,
job.
it's exhausting.
I don't know how I have time for anything else. Like I actually wrote a blog post once when I was like 20 called "Depression is a Full-Time Job," because I was not doing anything except trying to make my brain not explode, and I was busy like 16 hours a day. At the moment, I mean, what I think I didn't realize is you just build up loads and loads of different tools. So I have therapy, which has really helped me. I have been on lots of different medications for a long time, which periodically help and periodically make me feel worse. I also do acupuncture, which I've been doing the last few years, and that really has helped me like deal with a lot of the sort of physical symptoms of anxiety, I think. And then I also have found yoga really helps, which really annoys me because people told me for so long that yoga and exercise were going to help me, and I was like, fuck off, they won't. I hate you. And then I started doing yoga and I was like, oh, okay, this does help. I'm sorry.
You ever just hit the point where like, I don't want to do any of this shit right now? Like,
Oh
I'm
my God,
so
I know.
over it.
Yeah. And I think it's exactly, and you start really resenting it. And also like, I just spent so long being like, why can't I just be normal? Why does it take me like 3 appointments a week to just feel vaguely okay? And you know, the way that my depression manifests is I'll be okay. I also have PTSD, anxiety, and OCD, so those are sort of always bubbling under. But my depression, every few weeks I'll just crash, and at that point it's like I'm being possessed. I can't speak, I can't read, I can't get out of bed, I can't function for a few days, and then it passes. And that is also really hard because you end up having to cancel things, you know. And I mean, full disclosure, I had a really, really bad week last week, and we had to postpone this podcast. And it, you know, I really sometimes hate that about myself. I'm like, why do I have to have this thing that sort of affects my life to this extent?
Yeah. So what do you like, do you get embarrassed or ashamed about, when you are in bed or when you're not feeling good? Because I get that.
Oh my God.
I
Yeah.
can really try to like know logically like what's going on, right? Like I'm just going, because I've had the same, like had like 2 weeks where I was just like could not
Yeah.
function at all, and I get really ashamed about it, and I feel like shit.
It's so mad because it is basically my job now is telling people not to be ashamed of their mental health, and I can say that as many times as I want, and then when I'm going through it I get so ashamed and I don't tell anyone. I mean, I've had jobs in the past where I think they thought that I was like addicted to terrible sushi because every few weeks I would email being like, I can't come to work, I have food poisoning.
I read you writing that somewhere, by the way. So when you were like, I was like, I know what's happening here, but I respect it.
Yeah, but I can't even say it to you. You know, I know that you're this person that's also open, but it's like in that moment, the idea of being honest about what I'm going through, it just feels terrible. And also the truth is a lot of people in our world don't really get it yet, and I've had times in the past where I've had a huge panic attack and I haven't been able to do something and people have not understood, and just thought it was an excuse. And it's one thing to say it and it is the hardest thing in the world to do it. And I just hope that like in 20 years I might be able to actually tell people what's going on.
Yeah. So what do you do like when you start feeling bad about having to stay in bed or, I really struggle with it.
Yeah, I think I have definitely found that every time I'm actually honest about it, like it helps, I think I originally started opening up about my mental health because it helped me so much. Like I was so crippled by the shame of it that it had basically like reduced my life to nothing because I didn't want to commit to anything in case I ended up not being able to do it, because I was struggling. And actually deciding to sort of arrange my life as if I didn't have these things and then deal with it when it happened was the thing that helped the most. But I'm definitely still overly cautious about committing to anything because I get so scared about what's going to happen with my mental health. And I think the truth is you just have to be honest about it and you have to tell people the truth and you have to sort of, try and make the world that you want to live in.
So now you live at home, right?
Well, I moved back to London and I live on my own in normal times, but I have moved back in with my whole family to help them during lockdown, which has been a whole other intense thing.
Yeah. But I find that when I'm alone or, my fiance, he'll travel or, when we're in our own home, I'm a little less concerned about what I'm giving off in terms of like when I'm going through it. Right. Because I only have to deal with, it's like I'm in my home, but for some reason out here, I'm like so worried about like if I'm going through it, what I'm making other people feel in that moment.
Yes.
Right. And so that's been really hard because I'm in a home with other people and I don't want to make them feel bad. And I don't know what to do.
You're literally speaking like out of my mouth. I have gotten so used to if I'm having a bad day, I get into bed, I watch TV, I play Candy Crush on my phone and I get through it on my own. And that's what I do and it's fine. And when I had my bad episode last week and ended up lying to you and telling you that I was sick, my parents were here and my brothers were here and I couldn't stop saying to them like, I'm so sorry you have to see me like this, I'm so sorry I'm such a burden, I'm so sorry I've put you through this. And they were like, we're fine, you're the one suffering, like we just want to help. But that guilt at making your loved ones deal with your mental illness is so crippling and something so few people talk about. It's amazing to hear you say that.
Well, that's what I mean when I say like I'm pretty good at dealing with outside people, you know, boundaries, plans, canceling. Like I've kind of learned to do what I need to do in that way. But for some reason, when it comes to my behavior around my family or my fiance, I feel so shitty. And I do the same thing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. In this environment, I'm like, well, do I lock myself in my room, like in the bedroom and be like isolated? Or do I try and like come out for dinner and try and act like it's okay? Because I don't want to be like a monster. And it's not even like I'm mean. I'm just like,
me too.
you know, like I'm just like, there's just a nasty cloud over my head and my energy is bad. So it's been really hard in this environment because of course I'm having my own mental health issues, and then you don't want to rub it off on other people.
Yeah. I think the thing I always try and think, and it's so much easier said than done, and I'm not good at this yet, but trying to think like if my brother went through this or if my mum went through this, the idea that I'd be angry or resentful or anything like that, you know, it wouldn't occur to me. I just want to help them, and other people do feel that way towards us. It's just very hard to acknowledge that. I basically just think of myself, again, if you've grown up being the fuck up, it's very triggering to sort of go back to that place.
Feeling incapacitated again.
Yeah. And feeling like you are putting, you know, a burden on people you love, even though they'd never say that you're a burden. That's still how I feel.
Yeah. I get locked in these, you know, thoughts too, where it's just like when I'm in it, because I also obviously have the anxiety piece where I'm like, start overthinking like everything that I've said that's come out of my mouth. What does that mean? Fuck, can I take it back? Like, should I text this? Like, I get so manic about my thoughts going on in like terms of wanting to take care of everyone else's feelings when it comes to dealing with my stuff.
Yes. I mean, exactly the same. I've never really talked to anyone about this, but it's so hard. And like last time I was going through this, I just kept thinking like everything's going to change. You know, when I start feeling better, they're never going to look at me the same way. And obviously, you know, my family's teenage boys and a very busy mum and my granny who can't hear, like they've all just jumped back to normal, you know. But in my head at that moment, I was like, I'm going to have to leave in shame now that they've seen this side of me. You know, it's so,
it's
exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting, but I feel you. And I think that that's just like one of the best things to do is be honest. And I have, you know, I've had a lot of girls actually or people I've had episodes with and things, and some people are like, I have to reschedule, I feel like shit, and I'm like, all good, hit me up when you're ready, because I get it, you know, like but I understand some people would be like, I get over it and like whatever.
Well, I think the truth is most people react very kindly, and you've just got to trust that. And also, if someone reacts badly, like they're probably not someone you want in your life or you want to be working with.
I feel that. Okay, so say someone is struggling with their mental health right now, and there's so many different kinds, but you know, what would be your, you know, kind of words of advice?
I think my biggest advice, and I generally don't like advice because I think advice is so specific. Yeah, it's so specific to individuals, but
your parting words.
My biggest advice is just not to put pressure on yourself. Like, I think even when it's easier said than done, but even when I was at my most mentally ill, I felt like I needed to be the one to make myself get better, and I needed to like get through this myself. And I would make these crazy schedules where I'd be like, wake up at 7, meditate, do yoga, take your medication, eat right. You know, there's actually a lot of pressure put on mentally ill people to like do the things you're meant to do. And actually, I wish someone had just said to me, like, you're really going through it. You can stay in bed as long as you want. You can watch Grey's Anatomy and not do yoga and eat crap food. You just need to get through this moment. So that would be my advice, which isn't really advice.
Well, no, it's commentary. It's helpful commentary. Okay, well, I really am so happy we finally got to do this.
I know. I want us to meet.
Do it again sometime.
Once we're allowed to fly and hug and
I
touch
know.
people.
I know, definitely. But I'm super glad we got to talk. And I'm also loving your get ready with me to go nowhere. Please don't
Thank
stop.
you.
It's so
Yeah.
funny. It's actually so funny. I loved it.
I've got another one coming. I've been doing get ready with me for nothing videos where I do my makeup and talk about mental health. So if you're interested in that niche Venn diagram of issues, please tune into my Instagram.
Scar Curtis, right?
Yes,
At
Scarlett Curtis.
Scar Curtis, SCARCURTIS.
Yes.
Wait, so before you log off, can we take some screenshots?
Yes.
Okay,
Wait,
great.
let me move this mic.
So
that was so great. I mean, I wish I could hug you.
I know it's okay. We can
You're
do
so
virtual hugs.
yeah. I think
Wait, hang on.
have
Before
okay, yeah.
we have to do I should be saying this in our sign off, which is
I'll sign off.
thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. This
And
has
you're a
been a
wonderful
joy.
guest.
Be sure to share, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram at I'm Over It Podcast or me at Atlanta Bean. I've also launched a Patreon if you really, really love I'm Over It. So head over to www.patreon.com/I'm Over It. Until next time.